last thing that I want to cover before we actually get into the skills building is I want to introduce you to this curve here. And this is something that I do with every single one of my clients, whether those are psychotherapy clients or whether that's somebody that I'm working with for optimization. When we get into the last part of this training and I start talking about forward-facing trauma therapy, you'll see how that you can use this same material. We're using it right now to treat traumatic stress, but you can begin to use this same material for helping people to optimize, for them to perform better, it's just different, a little bit different in focus, and this is a really important conceptual piece of helping people to understand. So this is an illustration of the Yerkes-Dodson law. Yerkes-Dodson they first published in 1908, 109 years ago, was the first publication with rat studies of looking at this phenomena. And it's been published in thousands of journals since then, in across disciplines, from performance to psychology to neurophysics to business and industry. What it does is it is the looking at the relationship between cognitive and motor performance and energy in the body. And it's kind of a complex relationship. And if you look at that slide, you see over on the left-hand side, with performance, motor and cognitive performance being on the y-axis, and arousal, energy in the body, being on the x-axis. If you move all the way over to the left, you see that when there's no energy in the body, there is no performance. You don't run very fast when you're sleeping. As you add energy to the body, notice what happens to performance is it goes up, 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 up until it reaches maximal. And then once it reaches maximal, look at what happens when you continue to add energy to that body. Then what you see is a precipitous decline in capacity in motor and cognitive functioning. You lose your coordination and your agility and your speed and your stamina. You lose your intelligence and your creativity. Is that those diminish. And in short order, what self-regulation is catching yourself being over on the right-hand side of that curve and moving in 1 to 2 seconds back over to the left-hand side of the curve. That's really what self-regulation is. It's boop, boop. It's being able to, it's not moving it all the way down to complete and total profound relaxation. It's just getting back over, because on the left-hand side of that curve, you are not generating symptoms. The right-hand side of that curve is like living at 25,000 feet, that you are actively dying, that the energy in your body is killing your organs. It is causing distress, and you are symptomatic over on the right-hand side of that curve. And the folks that come to see me for therapy, they wake up and start their day and spend all day long on the right-hand side of that curve. That's what PTSD is. PTSD is the constant perception of threat through a person's life. They are constantly perceiving danger in their environment, and they are not regulating that autonomic nervous system. So they're way over there on the right-hand side, and it's untenable. Human beings cannot live in constant sympathetic dominance. And just about every suicide, completed suicide, is authored by an attempt to get out of sympathetic dominance. And when you start getting this and you understand this, it just is a beautiful way to begin working with folks who are suicidal. Is, today, when I sit across from somebody who is suicidal, I ask them the question, do you want to die, or do you want the pain to go away? And if they tell me they want to die, I become a law enforcement, an agent of law enforcement. I don't have anything for them. I am now, if they have plan and means and they say I want to die, it is my job to protect them. So I'm not doing treatment with those folks. But if the person says to me, I want the pain to go away, I can look at them and say, are you willing to give me one session? and we'll get that pain away for you. I promise you. And they go, yeah, right. And I say, don't pay me if I don't. And what do? They'll cross their arms and they'll say, bring it. And what I've done is just engage them. And what I do then with the rest of the session is I spend a little bit of time talking to them about their autonomic nervous system and the way that people who are suicidal have framed up. They have, it's an external locus of control. They believe that it's their relationship or their finances or the shame of the experiences, the things that they've done, or it's always something out there. And the way that they have it framed up is that the only way they can have quality of life and not die is if something in the environment changes. And they've been working their butt off trying to get the environment into the shape that it doesn't scare them anymore. And I don't know about you, but I just kind of am not powerful enough to smith the world into the shape that it doesn't scare me anymore. And so one of the things that I start teaching people who are suicidal in that first session is that it is not what's going on. It's not your finances that is causing you to kill yourself, wanting to kill yourself. It's not the breakup of this relationship. It's not your partner cheating on you. It's not you losing your job or being publicly shamed or getting arrested or whatever else. It's not that. It's what's going on in your body while you're encountering that. And I promise you that if you'll take it with me the next half an hour and learn how to regulate your autonomic nervous system, I promise you're going to be able to walk through this and not want to die and reclaim a quality of life no matter what the external context is. Would you be willing to try that with me? You can kill yourself next week. Can we spend one last full measure, to quote Abraham Lincoln, one last full measure of you putting all your effort into doing this one activity? And if it doesn't work, then we'll talk about that next week. And I teach them what I'm about to teach you. And it just becomes a really exciting way to work with suicide, because it is a resolution. It's not a Band-Aid. It is a resolution of the problem. Because it turns out that Virginia Satir was right when she said, back in the 80s, that the problem is not the problem. She said the coping is the problem. And what I'll do is give a 21st century spin on that. The problem is not the problem. The autonomic dysregulation is the problem. And as we teach people to regulate their autonomic nervous system functioning, they can encounter all of those things out there in a comfortable body. So let's do that. Now, the way that I start this out, when I'm working with a client, when I'm doing it with an audience, I've taught this to literally hundreds of thousands of people, and that's not an exaggeration. More than 200,000. I think it's probably close to somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 people that I've taught this internationally. Doing it one-on-one, doing it in training groups, doing it online, doing it I've taught a whole lot of people to self-regulate. And I've kind of come up with some ways to do this. When I first started doing it, I was a technocrat. That if you weren't doing it with this one particular technique that I'm going to show you when we finish up, when we get to the end, if you weren't doing it with that technique, then you weren't doing it right. And in the almost 20 years that I've been doing this, I've evolved. I've matured a little bit. And so now what I do is I start organically and I move more towards technical. So we're going to start with very little skills work and move it into much more skills-based stuff. Excuse me. But what I've also done is I have made this a collaborative process. Instead of it being a professor and student, one who has giving to one who has not. I start this process by leveling the playing field. And it truly ends up being peer-to-peer, this process. That's been another interesting occurrence for me in 35 years of treating trauma survivors, is it's become much more peer-to-peer to me in my 35th year than it was in my 10th year. So what I tell my clients is this: I'm afraid of you. I perceive you as a threat. Why do you suppose that I perceive you as a threat? And my clients, a lot of them go, I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. I'm not dangerous. And they get really self-conscious, and I say, I absolutely know that. But I still, no matter how kind you are, no matter how sweet and nonviolent you are, I still perceive you as a threat. And I'll ask something like, why do you suppose I perceive you as a threat? Why does any human being, I know that I'm not really in danger here with you, yet I still perceive you and your judgment of me as a threat. Why? And the large majority of my clients get it. Sometimes I have to coach them with that, but most of them get it. And they start going, oh, painful past learning. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. Absolutely. I've seen, 12,000 clients in my career. Do you think I've ever had any bad experiences working with clients? And they nod their head with a smile and say, probably, yeah. And I say, you're absolutely right. When I'm doing a training in an audience, I say I do 200 training days a year. How many times do you think I see this? A lot. I'm a musician. How many times I screw up songs? Every time I play. I have a lot of painful past learning of sitting across from people or standing in front of people. And what's happening is, as I'm sitting across from my client, is all those painful past experiences, going all the way back to my development, the attachment trauma pieces, but also the professional experiences, those are all intruding into my perceptual system. While I'm looking at my client, what's happening is I'm perceiving their judgment of me as a threat. And I'm having sympathetic arousal while I'm sitting with my clients. And what I did for 15 plus years of my career was I just brute forced and muscled my way through that hour of sitting with my client. Today, I'm a little bit more graceful. So to demonstrate what this process looks like is, those of you who are watching this on a screen at home or wherever you are, I am looking right at you right now. I am looking into the eye of the camera, and all of my attention is on that eye of the camera. But right now, you don't have any idea that I am not paying attention to that eye of the camera, paying attention to you. My attention, even though I'm still looking at the camera, my attention's in my own body. And I'm scanning my own body. You notice that I'm not looking away, but my attention's in my own body. I'm noticing the muscles that are constricted. I'm releasing that constriction, boop, and my attention's right back on you. And what I just did was I caught myself being over here on the right-hand side of Yerkes Dodson, and with the release of those muscles, I moved myself back over to the left-hand side. And what that means is my neocortex is rebooting. Instead of it diminishing in its electro functioning, it is expanding. So now I can use language gracefully. Now I have control of my motor movements. Now I'm able to be, and I say what I mean and mean what I say without saying I mean. And I'm able to have a little bit of grace. And I don't much like sitting in front of a camera and talking, but I can do that now inside of a body that is comfortable instead of suffering through. And I go on to the next thing, as I'm doing right now, talking through the next thing and bringing up the next idea. And that goes on for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. And then I do it again. I'm looking at you again, paying attention to you. And now I focus my attention back in my body, and I discover myself, the muscles in my body, nice and comfortable and relaxed, right? Right? All right? No. What? They're tightened back up again. Why are they tightened back up again? Why didn't I just be able to stay? Once I did that interoception and then the release of that tension, why wouldn't it just be able to set it and forget it, and that it stay in relaxation? Well, what's not changed? My learning history hasn't changed. The camera is still looking at me. I'm still sitting here in front of you and all of the thousands of yous that are going to be watching this. And I am perceiving your judgment of me as a threat because of my painful learning. I'm in no danger from your judgment. And so this process requires a constant coming back to, and what you've already noticed as you've been playing with this yourselves, is that you can't have dual foci. You could only put your cursor of awareness at one place at one time. And mostly my cursor of awareness is on content, and then communicating that content to the camera and kind of back and forth here. But what I'm doing is I'm adding a level of complexity. I'm also doing this. You know, I'm kind of communicating with you all this material, but once every 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, I'm going, whoops, check in, tight, release, whoop, and then back to the activities of daily living. And by doing that, I am not ever letting my sympathetic nervous system get and stay dominant. It's trying to, because I'm constantly perceiving threat, my sympathetic nervous system's adding energy, and then I'm pulling the plug, and it dissipates. But as soon as I take my attention off of my body, it starts cranking the energy back up, and then I got to dissipate it again. And that's what self-regulation, effective self-regulation looks like. It's not a set it and it stay down here in parasympathetic. It is a release, and then it looks like a sawtooth wave. It starts to come back up, and then I come back to awareness and do the interoception and acute relaxation. I drop back down here, and then it comes back up, and bloop, bloop. And that's what effective self-regulation looks like through the day. It is this constant working of dialectic of the external back to the internal and releasing. So the way that I do this with clients and with audiences is I said I start organic. And the way that I do that first is I say, I'm going to ask you to do a process that I call the wet noodle, which is really just a body scan. It's what I just did. It is scanning your body and then noticing whatever muscles are tight and just releasing them. So you're just turning those muscles from rigid to pliable, to release. And I'm going to ask you to do that while you're watching this for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you in a comfortable body right now? Which is the question that I ask when I'm doing an audience. I say, how many of you in the room were able to find your way in those 5 seconds to being inside of a comfortable body? And what happens is somewhere between 60 and 70% of the room raises their hands. And I say, wonderful, congratulations. You that raised your hands now know that you have the skills to never experience stress again for the rest of your lives. And they look like this, and I say, absolutely you do. You've demonstrated that you have the skill. You don't need to learn any new skill. You just did it. But what nobody's ever coached you to do, what you've never worked on, is to walk into your day, into your world, and begin to confront those perceived threats instead of avoiding them, and confronting them with a relaxed muscle body. That's what I'm going to ask you to start practicing. Is you already got the skill, but now to intentionally bring yourself to that relaxation while you're walking into high demand situations with your family, with your work, with driving, with all the activities of your day, is that you start catching yourself where your energy is going up, and you intentionally bring it back down. And that's how you live stress-free, is intentionally relaxing when you are perceiving a threat. 60%, somewhere between 50 and 60% of my clients who have pretty complex PTSD can get that with just an intentional focus. And I ask them, it's always kind of, this is a little gambit that I do. I say, and if the moment that they get that relaxation, I celebrate that. I was like, your trauma's over. You're done. Now all you got to do is practice it. You got the skill. You cannot have traumatic stress while you're in that body state right there. So let's practice that some more. Let's do it again. 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you back to a comfortable body? And if they say, yeah, cool. We're on the downhill slope now. Everything else is downhill. All you got to do is begin to practice that. I want you to start trying to get that up to 200 times a day. You get that up to 200 times a day, and you're just going to watch your traumatic stress fall off the table. And every time that you're having symptoms or distress, it's going to be because you spent 15 or 20 minutes or an hour of not checking in. And so, are you willing to practice that for the next week and come back and share with me what happens when you are able to confront those perceived threats of your lives, of your life, in a body that has relaxed muscles? Would you be willing to try that for the next week and come back and report what was different during the time or the times that you were successful in doing that versus the times that you forgot to or you were unable? Would you try that? And my clients say, yeah, sure. And I say, great, you're on your way. And when they come back next week, the very first thing they say is, I failed. And I go, oh, well, let's talk about that. You failed every single time? Well, no, not every time, but mostly. I said, yeah, me too. I'm always failing. Always. I never, ever discover the muscles in my body relaxed. Ever. And every single time. And what's happening is that I discover myself failing, I correct to a relaxed body, and the more that I do that, the better quality of life that I have. I'm failing my way to success. Are you willing to join me in failing your way to success? And they chuckle and say, you're just hard to win with, Eric. I say, yeah, I am. And argue for your limitations and you win. So I say, well, tell me about the one time that you were able to be successful. The one time that you were able to get the muscles in your body relaxed. And they go, it's not a very big deal. And I was like, I want to hear it. And they'll say, well, usually I go in and I get my daughter up to go to school, and she never wakes up on time, and I got to come back 5 or 6 times and nag her, and I end up getting angry with her, and we just seem to start every morning on the wrong foot. And yesterday I walked into her room and I just sat down on her bed, and instead of anticipating this difficulty, I did what you said to do, and I just put my hand on her and I shook her and I said, sweetie, it's time to get up. And I left the room and came back 5 minutes later and she was still sleeping. And I got irritated. But instead of yelling at her, I softened and I shook her again. And I said, it's time to get up. And left her room. And the same thing happened, is that 5 minutes later I came back and she was still sleeping. And I had her breakfast prepared and I said, it's time to get up now. And she finally did get up. I had to come back 2 more times. It was pretty much the same exact thing that I did before, but she wasn't angry with me and I wasn't angry with her. And that to me sounds like a miracle. That to me sounds like something pretty spectacular. And my client goes, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. I said, yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. You just widened out your space. And you got to choose how you wanted to be with your daughter, rather than being how your instincts have forced you to be. That's a big deal. I have a friend of mine in Sarasota who's a philosopher. Like, he's really a philosopher. He hangs out at Starbucks and he philosophizes. He's got a PhD in philosophy. And I used to do a lot of late night motorcycle riding. And he is, I would come in there in the evening and he'd be there sometimes, and I have a cup of chai and we'd have some really wonderful conversations. And He has this quote, it's in one of his books, and I just love it. He says that I am both the beast and its rider. My beast. My beast wants me to kill you or run away from you. You're a perceived threat, and what I want to do is my beast, when the threat response is active inside of me, my beast is in control, and it is compelling me to act out aggressively or to get the heck away from whatever it is that I'm afraid of. And for 15 plus 20 years of my career, I had some competency of taking that beast and strapping in on top of that beast and using my spurs and kicking that beast and manhandling it and forcing it into and through the activities of my day. Seeing clients, writing reports, everything that I did. It was every single thing that I did was against this energy. I had to push and force myself through it. I can do that. But when I work a day that way, what kind of shape am I in at the end of that day? And for those of you who have heard the term compassion fatigue, that is the genesis of the symptoms of compassion fatigue, is that people who use that way of coping, the people who navigate their way through the day by brute force, at the end of the day, they have been symptom generating. When I regulate, when I stop squeezing the muscles of my body, my beast is no longer active. It's fed. It's happy to go wherever I want to take it. My animal is dormant, and Eric's in control. But when the threat response is active and I'm not managing that threat response, I'm not managing the energy in my body, then the beast becomes more figural, more in control, and I find myself acting out aggressively or avoidantly and breaching my integrity and acting in ways that bring me shame. And my hope is that you don't want to live that way, is that you're willing to make some new mistakes instead of the same old ones. So the next technique that I use is, it's not up there. I actually put it on another slide set, but somehow I got them all changed. So I'll just walk you through this one. And this is a recent one, and it's similar to the one we just did, but it's a little bit more technical. And it's what I call it skeletal to muscle. You have a muscular system and you have a skeletal system. Do you know the difference? And everybody kind of thinks they do, but when I ask them to start describing it, they struggle a little bit. And so what I do is I say, touch the point of your elbow. That's skeletal. Touch your forearm. That's muscular. Hard, rigid, soft, pliable. The purpose of your skeletal system is support. The purpose of your muscles are ambulation and organ control and being able to do motor stuff. Well, it turns out that the skeletal system does what it's designed to do really well. There is no need for you to have chronic constriction in the muscles of your body. That you can put your weight on your feet and your legs and your pelvis and your spine and your clavicle and your shoulders and your neck, cervical vertebrae. They'll hold everything perfectly. You don't need to have any muscle tension. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're sitting down, is that you trust that seat. As you go, you got to start with that. Your seat has not fallen through on you while you've been watching this. Chances are for the next 5 seconds it's not going to fall through on you in that time. So I'm going to ask you to trust the seat that you're sitting in, and to just line your sit bones up and line your spine up, and and just trust that whole frame of yours to hold the weight of your body, and just completely release and soften all the muscles in that body. 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you are now inside of a comfortable body? And what happens is that in a group of folks, the 75%, 80% of the folks raise their hands. And I say, cool, we're getting there. So you now know, those of you that raised your hands, you now know how to go forward in your life and never experience stress again. Is to just confront those situations in your life that are perceivedly threatening and do that in a body that has relaxed muscles. Cool, one more time, 5 seconds of shifting the support to your skeletal system, releasing all the muscles. 2, 3, 4, 5. Comfort? Wonderful. If not, then we go on to further skills. And the next one I'm going to move to is one that is a little bit more technical. And I stole this, if you'll remember, I talked a little bit about Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman's work on combat. And this is a technique that he talks about in his book that they teach, started teaching Force Recon, Special Forces for Marines, way back in the early 19th century. Most of you have seen movies or read enough to know that a combatant who is targeting a weapon needs to be in a relaxed body as much as they can, much towards parasympathetic, because any sympathetic activation equals, micro movements here, and a millimeter of movement here equals yards off target downrange. So especially with special forces, who are taught to do a whole menu, a whole suite of combat activities, that they wanted to figure out some way that they could transition from doing whatever it is that they're doing, if it's transport, if it's demolition, if whatever else that they're doing, and if they kind of come on a situation where they are required to bring their weapon to bear, how could they get into very quickly a regulated state so they would have competency in being able to target that weapon. And what they began teaching them was peripheral vision, was to spend 6 or 8 or 10 seconds of attending to periphery, of maximizing peripheral vision before looking into the eye of the scope. Because when you think about it, I've worked with a lot of combat veterans and active combatants and law enforcement veterans and active law enforcement, and I've done a lot of narratives about combat or about shooting incidents with law enforcement, and almost every one of them describes what happens to vision is that it becomes tunnel vision, is that they get so aroused that their only focus is on that threat. And it becomes hyper-focused. And that's a really good signal that you've become dysregulated. So, and the caveat of that is that, when I teach this similar to this same 2 pieces, the Tools for Hope stuff, the autonomic nervous system functioning and self-regulation to law enforcement. But I call the workshop Stronger, Faster, Smarter, and show them how that if something's going to last 20 or 30 seconds, then yeah, your skills that you learned in your training of using overwhelming force, I don't got anything to teach you there. You know how to do that. That is the place to use that training. But if the thing's going to last for longer than 30 seconds, or if the threat dissipates and now you need relational skills in that situation, then what you need is another gear. You need another gear so that you can sustain maximal functioning, you can sustain stamina, you can sustain intelligence, instead of having that hump and then 30 seconds later you're starting to be in diminished functioning. So that regulation, once the intensity of that thing's over, is really important to come back to regulation and not staying in that state of jacked upness, especially when the immediate threat has dissipated and now the skills that are needed are the relational skills. And most law enforcement start getting that, and it starts making sense. And especially when I say, you know, what you've done is an instinctual hypervigilance. And it's gotten you this far. I'm not taking anything away from that, but it's costing you. And the longer that you stay in the job, it's costing you more and more. What I'm going to ask you to do is to have two gears, is that you begin to replace more and more and more hypervigilance with relaxed vigilance, so that you're stronger, faster, smarter, that you keep your head on the swivel, you stay situationally aware, but you're doing that in a dialed down arousal system so that you are able to A, not generate symptoms, and B, retain maximal functioning. And as you can imagine, that law enforcement are slow, a lot of them, to want to adopt the interoceptive process. A lot of people who have developed those combat skills are not very interoceptive, and many of them are not much interested in developing those capacities. And so peripheral vision is a really cool way to teach people. It's the only way of self-regulation that I know, that and breathing to a certain degree. The problem with breathing, regulated or diaphragmatic breathing, is if the person already has the skill, it's a great tool for self-regulation. But learning to get the relaxation response, learning to get the lowering of arousal from breathing, it usually takes 20 to 30 seconds of practice, and that's 20 to 30 seconds that the person has to disengage from the activities of daily living to practice the regulated breathing. And a lot of folks don't have the 20 or 30 seconds because they're engaged in their lives. You know, a law enforcement officer can't say, oh, hold on a second, I need to breathe. You know? But they can do 2 or 3 or 4 seconds of peripheral vision. So peripheral vision is kind of a brute force way to be able to get that regulation process. There's a wonderful, I don't know if you guys, maybe some of you even saw the movie with Tom Hanks, Sully, Sullenberger, the guy that landed the plane on the Hudson. There's a really interesting interview with him with Katie Couric after he landed the plane, and you know, she's talking through him with that, and she said, well, what did you do when you found out that, you know, the systems were failing? And he said, I've been training for this my whole life. He said, I knew what to do. He said, but the very first thing I had to do, he said, the only way that I could get that plane on the water without crashing was I had to do several things simultaneously at the same time and have them all work out just right. And she said, well, how'd you do that? And he said, well, the very first thing I had to do was I had to force myself to be calm. Booyah. More important than all those people's lives, more important than everything else, was that he knew that he needed to not jack up into that where he lose motor and cognitive functioning. He knew he needed to retain all of his capacities, his agility, his thinking capacity. So the very first thing that he did was he let go of everything else and he got himself regulated so that he could fulfill the demands to be able to do that. And I just love that. That's a really good articulation of how important that it is to do the self-regulation before I engage in high demand situations. And peripheral vision is a good way to do that. So without any further ado, you guys have been patient, I've been opening up windows here, I'm going to ask you to focus on some dot straight ahead that's at about eye level or 5 or 10 degrees above. Just any dot, just focus on it. The brand of the Canon is, the brand of the camera is a Canon, and I'm focusing on the O in that Canon right now, and just hyper focus in on that dot, whatever that dot is. And now for the next 5 seconds, soften that focus so that that dot gets a little bit blurry. And then next, what I'm going to ask you to do is to put your fingers up here beside your face at about 70 degrees on each side. Now, without moving your eyes, don't move your eyes back and forth. Keep your eyes fixated ahead. But what you're doing now is that you're no longer focusing on what's in front of you. And your right eye is now focusing out here to the right into the periphery, while simultaneously your left eye is focusing on this periphery. So really what you're doing is that you're just intentionally widening out your peripheral vision so that you're attending to as much out here to the side as you can. And hold that for 6 or 8 or 10 seconds while you are attending to your periphery and expanding your peripheral vision as best you can. And notice what happens in your body while you're doing that. And for me, it doesn't work for everybody. That's true. But for me, when I do that, what happens is I can actually hear and feel my heart rate going dun 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 dun. Is it just slows down when I attend to peripheral vision? Because what you're doing is that you're forcing, when you open up out of tunnel vision, which is where your sympathetic nervous system is driving vision to focus on the threat, when you force it back open, you are forcing your nervous system out of sympathetic into parasympathetic. It's kind of a cool way to do that in a brute force way. It works really nicely as for folks that do, since most of you are that are watching this are in a service role. And you know, for the first 15 years of my career, what I did was I sat on the edge of my seat and I looked at my clients and I worked with them like this. And I was totally focused on their countenance the whole 50 minutes that they were there. I was just hyper focused on them. And then we got done with the session, I shook their hand, they walked out the door, and I went, whew. I didn't breathe the whole time that I was with my clients for the first 15 years. And today, if I want to use peripheral vision as a way of doing that, is I'm looking right at you right now, into the eye of the camera, and right now, you have no idea that I'm not paying any attention at all to you, that my attention's out of my periphery. I feel myself have that relaxation response, and then I just bring my attention right back to the eye of the camera. And doing that several times throughout a 50-minute session, what's happening is I'm continuing to drop that arousal back down, away from the right-hand side, back to the left-hand side of Yerkes-Dodson. That's another way of doing it. And then the last skill that I want to show you is a technique that I started this process with. And it's kind of a, I'll do this briefly, it's kind of a cool story. In 1990, I started rock climbing. I used to live in New River Gorge, just right outside of it in West Virginia. And it's one of the best climbing spots in the eastern United States. And I'd go and would top rope in the beginning. And I'd start climbing and I'd get 15 or 20 feet up off the deck. And I'd start doing what they call the Elvis. There's a sewing machine. I would get so anxious that I lost all of my dexterity, all of my agility, all of my strength, and I couldn't climb anymore. And I just was getting really frustrated with it, which was really weird because they had a gym in Fayetteville that I could go get on the gym, and I could climb pretty well in the gym. But once I got on the rock, I just lost all that capacity because I got so scared. I was perceiving so much threat. Now, I didn't know any of this then, but there was this really smart alecky climbing guide who was taking a semester off of med school, and he would spend his days paddling on the river and doing videography, and then he did private rock climbing instruction. And you know, he was talking to me one day. He saw me climbing. He said, "Bro, you need to check out this neuromuscular therapist in Lewisburg." And he gave me her card or her number, and I did that, and I went and saw her. And I saw her for several sessions, and she started working with tennis balls and golf balls with me, and helped me to get a felt sense of my pelvic floor muscles. And she was helping me to what she called open up my pelvis. Now, before then, conceptually, I knew I had a pelvis, but I didn't have a felt sense of those muscles in my body. And what she helped me to do was have interoception, to have agency and felt sense. And what I learned, and what I've since learned, is that people that have traumatic stress have chronic muscle constriction in their pelvis. Particularly their psoas muscle is chronically constricted. And that's what was happening with me. And she taught me how to have a felt sense of releasing that, and some exercises to do around that. And I would go to the crag, and I'd do that. And then I was able to climb a whole lot better. And that was 1990. In 1998, I thought, I wonder if this would work with helping folks to get relaxed. And started digging into the research and started learning about paramedics using the vasovagal response of getting for the treatment for supraventricular tachycardia. And that was really intriguing for me, is that, you know, when a paramedic's working with somebody that has tachycardia, what they do is they have them do a Valsalva. They have them bear down like they're having a bowel movement. And what happens is there's a precipitous bradycardic response. Heart rate drops, 180 beats a minute, back to normal sinus rhythm, back to 80 beats a minute, 60 beats a minute, in a second. It's why geriatrics sometimes die in the bathroom, because when they're having a bowel movement, they get that precipitous drop, and if they have a cardiac condition, it'll trigger an MI. That was all intriguing stuff for me. As the research has progressed, what we've seen is that the dorsal vagal is a big deal. What's going on in the muscles of the pelvis is a big deal. And it ends up being a mitigator of arousal, that when we are sympathetically dominant, the muscles in your pelvis are constricted. When you bring relaxation to the muscles in your pelvis and you stop squeezing the muscles in your pelvis around the dorsal section of the vagus nerve, you produce a relaxation response, and a potent one. So let me demonstrate to you how to do this and what this feels like. I'm going to ask you all to hold your hands out, palms up. And I'm going to ask you for just a second to put your hands under your butt and feel those two bones that you're sitting on. Those are called the ischial tuberosities. If you're like me and you got junk in the trunk, you got to wobble around a little bit to find those bones, but find and touch those two sit bones that are underneath your butt there. And let me just say a word. Remember, we talked earlier about the power of the therapeutic alliance and how important that is. And most of you watching this film have just put your hands under your butts. Most of you watching this video are advanced degreed professionals, and I asked you to put your hands under your butt and you did it. Pretty powerful is that therapeutic relationship, just as a demonstration. Next, touch here. This is called the iliac crest. It's the pelvic hip bones that stick out there on the side. Touch those solidly, and then release. Now, what you've just done is that you've made a touch memory in your body for 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 2 on the bottom and the 2 on top. And when you think about, and here's the deal, you should be able to right now have a felt sense of those 4 points. Not a cognitive, not where you're thinking about it, but you're actually taking your cursor of awareness out of your head and you're going and finding those 4 geographical points in your body with the lingering sensation of where you've just touched them. If that doesn't happen for you, then touch them again, just so you know exactly where those points are with a felt sense. And then next, what I'm going to ask you to do is to imagine connecting all 4 of those points with a straight line. So you got a straight line across the front there, from that bone to that bone. Then you got a straight diagonal line down the side to the sit bone, and then a straight line across the bottom between the 2 sit bones, and then a straight diagonal line back up the other side to the pelvic bone there. And when you think about that square, or that quadrangle, for some folks it's not square, but it's square-ish. It's 2-dimensional plane, and it sits, whether you're sitting or whether you're standing, it sits in your body at about a 45-degree angle. And when you think about what that what that plane bisects across is that it cuts across all of those muscles of the pelvis, starting up there high and cutting down to low at a 45-degree angle. It's slicing right across your pelvic floor muscles. Cool. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the next 20 seconds is to allow that square to expand in all four directions so that there is no clenching anywhere in the middle of that square. You're just going to completely soften that whole area of your body. And for 10 more seconds, focusing on the muscles that are in the very center of that square, your core muscles, opening those and completely releasing those. Congratulations. You have parasympathetic dominance. It is physiologically impossible for you to have stress while your pelvic floor muscles are relaxed. Impossible. And what you'll notice going forward from this training is that every time you have stress, you notice those muscles, and I promise you, every time you're aware that you have stress symptoms, you notice your pelvic floor muscles and they will be constricted. And when you release those pelvic floor muscles, you are immediately, 1 to 2 seconds, are returned to a state of comfort in your body. I'm going to ask you to do it one more time. Just completely soften those muscles of your pelvis for the next 20 seconds. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you to notice what happens in your body. Completely release the pelvic floor muscles. And then notice what's happening in the rest of your body. And what you'll notice is if those muscles, if you are keeping those muscles soft and released, you'll notice the muscles in your back, in your neck, and your feet, and your legs are also all relaxed. And those are the only group, those pelvic floor muscles, the pubiococcyx, the psoas, and the anal sphincter. When you release those muscles, you get a total systemic relaxation. So what I tell my clients is this: there is no right way to do self-regulation. You becoming aware of a muscle in your body that is tight, if that's a neck muscle, if that's a foot muscle, if that's a hand muscle, whatever is tight and you are releasing it, you're practicing self-regulation. And the more you do that, the better you're going to learn your body. When you get that up to 200 times a day, a couple of days of that, what's going to happen is that you're going to now, if it's your shoulders, as you release your shoulders, you're going to start to notice the muscles in your chest a little bit more and the muscles of your abdomen. And you are going to start to make friends with your body. You're going to be less and less and less avoidant of being in your body and more present in it. And I promise you that where you'll end up is awareness of those core muscles. But you start however you start. But if you're going to start that today, then I would coach you to go where you get the most bang for the buck. Because you can't release your feet muscles and spontaneously have your hand muscles relax. You can't relax your thigh muscles and spontaneously have your neck muscles relax. But when you release your pelvis, when you relax your pelvic floor muscles, you get total systemic relaxation. So if you're going to start that process today, I would invite you to go where you get the most bang for the buck and check it out. Release those muscles. Do you not get, for those of you that can, do you not get an immediate state of comfort in your body? And what you haven't seen it happen yet, and what I'm going to ask you to do is to go practice it. I don't want you to buy this from me and drink the Kool-Aid. I want you to go put it into practice and see if every time you do that it does not change significantly the quality of your life in those situations where previously you were not regulating. And you'll find things get different. So I work, as I said, and have for 20 years worked with folks that have severe complex PTSD, and a lot of those folks got severe complex PTSD from sexual trauma. And folks that have sexual trauma, especially from an early age, that's the source of their pain. That's the source of their fear, is that little boys and little girls who grow up in a constant state of fear, they have constantly constricted pelvises. And that's painful. Those chronic constriction, it hurts. And what those little boys and little girls learn to do to manage that pain, the only analgesia that they have is somatic dissociation. They learn to numb out their awareness, to disconnect from that chronic state of discomfort and pain. So when 15% of my clients, when I tell them about relaxing the muscles of their pelvis, they're going like this, that I don't feel it. And so I have to take a step further with them. I got to get, you see, the whole goal of this session is to reference. What I'm doing is attempting to reference and help my client to get into a relaxed muscle body, to feel what that feels like, and reference it so they can recreate it. That's the whole purpose that I'm doing here. So to add the brute force way of doing this, the first thing that I say with folks that have histories of sexual trauma and teaching them to do pelvic floor relaxation is I ask them, how much longer would you like your perpetrator to be in control of that area of your body? Are you interested in reclaiming that as your own? And if they say yes, we move forward. If they say no, I don't push it. Most of my clients say yes. I say, well, good. I'd be honored in helping you do that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is a Jacobsian relaxation strategy with the pubiococcyx muscle. And they go, what? And I say, yeah, a Kegel exercise. And they chuckle, a lot of them, especially females, because most females are aware of Kegel exercises. It's how to sustain vaginal tone, muscles in that area of your body, and also to retain continence as folks get older. And the Jacobsian is like progressive muscle relaxation. So what I do is to teach them to have a felt sense of this area of their body. What I ask them to do is for the next 5 seconds, I'm going to ask you to think about if you were mid-urination and you wanted to stop, the muscle that you'd have to squeeze to do that. You don't have to tell anybody you're doing this, but I'm going to ask you for the next 5 seconds to squeeze that muscle as tightly as you can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then release and take a nice deep breath. And on the exhale, release that muscle as profoundly as you can. And a lot of times you'll see your clients have a shiver, that there's a tremor that comes with releasing those muscles, especially when they've never been released. And memorize that sensation. With those muscles relaxed, what do you notice happening in your body? And they go, I feel pretty good. Cool. Let's practice that. Are you willing to practice that for the next week and come back and show me and talk to me about how that was different while you were staying in a relaxed muscle body? When I do this as a workshop, what I do is I cut now to do about 20 minutes of exercises that are designed to help people to practice self-regulation while engaging in activities. And they're 4 one-minute exercises that are 2 that are nonverbal and 2 that are verbal. And they're pretty cool, and they challenge the person to be relational and connected with another person while also trying to practice self-regulation. And so it's really almost impossible to do on a video, but we're going to try. What I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to take the next 60 seconds and I want you to just silently look at me while I look at you. And for the next 60 seconds, I want you to just look at me on the screen, and I'm going to be looking at you. And I'm going to ask that you keep your attention on me, on the screen, that you not let it wander. If you don't go to your happy place, you know, if your mind wanders, call it back and refocus on my countenance. And while you're doing that for the next 60 seconds, I'm going to ask you to keep all the muscles in your body relaxed. For 60 seconds, look me in the eye and go. And stop. The next exercise that we're going to do, this is the second one and the last one, it's also nonverbal, is that when I set this up in dyads in a group, I say, I'm going to ask one of you for the first 30 seconds to be the sender, and then we'll switch and you'll be the receiver, or vice versa. When you're in the sender's role, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to look at me on the screen with the intention of being helpful. I want you to exude whatever that thing is you exude when you help somebody. When you're in the receiver's role, what I'm going to ask you to do is open to allowing yourself to be cared for or cared about. Now, in both of those two roles, you're not really doing anything. All you're doing is when you're in the sender's role, you are holding the intention of helping. When you're in the receiver's role, you are holding the intention of being helped. In both of those two roles, I'm going to ask that you keep the muscles in your body relaxed. But I'm also adding a layer of complexity to that. I'm also going to ask you to notice which role, sender or receiver, do you perceive more threat? And how would you know that you're perceiving threat? Yeah, the muscles in your body are constricted. So just notice, is it in the sender's role or is it in the receiver's role that you're getting more of an impetus to constrict the muscles in your body? Bring them back to relaxation, but just start to be curious about which one of those and why would that particular role have more of a perceived threat than the other. You can start to be curious about that. So let's do it this way. You send to me first. You're going to look at the screen and I'm going to look back at you. I will receive, and then 30 seconds later, then I'm going to put my attention on the eye of the camera and try to, in whatever woo-woo way, using mirror neurons, I'm going to try to send that sense of care to you. So let's do 30 seconds of each and begin. Switch. And stop. Now, let me process this a little bit with you. In those 2 minutes of exercises, did you find your body tightening up one or more times at all? When I do this in an audience, I say, how many of you in this room found your body tightening up one or more times while we were doing those 2 minutes of nonverbal exercises? And every hand in the room goes up. So I'm going to assume that happened for you. And then I ask, as I'm going to ask you right now, were you in any danger while you were looking at the screen? And the answer to that is, my hope is no. I can't know what your context is, but I'm hoping that you're not in any real encroaching danger to life or limb right now. So why were you perceiving threat? And from the audience, a lot of times I hear, well, it is, it's awkward and it's a weird situation. And I say, that's a great guess. That's the wrong answer, but that's a great guess. And sometimes I hear, I don't know if I was doing it right. I say, that's also a great guess. Wrong answer, but great guess. Why do human beings perceive threat where there is no danger? Painful past learning intruding into the perceptual system of the present. So something about the eye contact with me, something about looking at the screen, something about the awkwardness of that and how weird it was that you were looking at the screen, that what that's doing is that is activating similar sensorial painful learning experiences of the past, somewhere where you had a performance demand upon you and you got ridiculed for not doing it right, or somewhere there's been an intimate situation where you've experienced pain, that this was activating your painful past learning, causing you to perceive threat during this activity where there was no danger, and this was as artificial as it could get. I'm not even in the same room with you. This is absolutely artificial, and most of you that were watching this still found your body tightening up in doing this distance learning activity. What up? That's a big deal. That starts to show you how ubiquitous this perceived threat thing is. It's just everywhere. It is woven into the warp and weft of our lives, and it's constant. We are constantly confronting perceived threats in every situation. And not a one of you, while we were doing this activity, really thought you were in a clinical situation. You were really aware that this was as artificial as it could be. You were looking at a screen, a monitor, or a television. You were not sitting across from a client. Now, we talked earlier about the impact that your autonomic dysregulation has upon you. Diminishes your neocortical functioning, it makes you uncomfortable, it makes you sick, it diminishes your quality of life. It has all kinds of negative effects upon you. It will kill you. Sympathetic dominance will kill you. But it's going to make you miserable a long time before you get the relief of death. I want you to take a second to appreciate the impact that your dysregulated autonomic nervous system has upon your patients, your clients. So, riddle me this. What happens when you're around somebody who is anxious? You get anxious, don't you? What happens when you're hanging out with somebody who is chilled and relaxed? The same thing happens for you. Congratulations on discovering the single most important intervention that you ever do with somebody who is a trauma survivor. Of all the skills that you're going to learn through this workshop, and we're about to open up a whole bunch of them, I'm going to teach you a bunch of skills that you're going to be able to walk away from this training with. But before doing any of those, the single most important thing for you to ever do with somebody who is a trauma survivor, all your clients, is you greet them and you continue to be with them in a regulated autonomic nervous system, a parasympathetically dominant nervous system. And what you do when you do that is you do this process called co-regulation. You are leaching that charge out of them. It's really hard for somebody to sustain fear and anxiety while they are in the context of somebody who is not. That what happens after 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 minutes is that that energy continues to dissipate, and they start to be able to settle down and have a neocortex functioning and start to be able to facilitate in this relationship secure attachment for the first time in their lives probably. They have never been in sustained contact with anybody who is regulated. And that's a really important thing for you to do. And in doing that, you facilitate that process with your clients. And conversely, not doing that, you can't teach self-regulation because your clients cannot regulate their own autonomic nervous system while you are dysregulated. No matter how calm you appear on the outside, they are intuitive and they feel through your voice tones and through your micro movements, they feel you dysregulated. So the most important skill that you're going to learn from this training is this capacity right here. And the cool thing about doing that is that when you now show up with your clients and staying in a relaxed muscle body, and you do that ongoing throughout the session, the really cool part about that is that you now have, first of all, you're not generating symptoms for yourself. That's nice. You are resilient. This is the centerpiece of resilience. This is how you work a career of caregiving and not suffer from doing it. But also what it means is that you have a fully functioning neocortex, which means you're able to access all your training, all your skills. Everything that you've learned in this workshop and will learn in this workshop will be available to you for the rest of your life every single time you're sitting with a client if you are in a regulated autonomic nervous system. You let that get dysregulated and stay dysregulated, and the aperture closes, and you start finding yourself, as I did for 15 years, being a practitioner of desperate eclecticism, where I'm throwing everything I got. And I spent $100,000 on professional development learning to get certified in all of the alphabet therapies because of how anxious I was as a clinician. And I wanted to have a whole pot full of pasta that I could just keep slinging at my client until something stuck. And looking back on that today, what I realized that I was doing with my clients was I was treating my clients as a way of managing my own anxiety. The way I selected my interventions was about getting my anxiety down and trying to get my clients to change and feel better. Now, maybe that's not all the way there, but that is certainly with my toes on the edge of the chasm looking over the pit of malpractice. That's getting pretty close to malpractice, of where I'm working out my issues in my client's treatment. And what's nice when you self-regulate is that you're not going to be desperate anymore. And your neocortex is going to be working really, really well. And while you're sitting with your client, what's going to happen is bloop, 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 bloop. All kinds of interventions are going to start popping up in your mind as you are listening to them. And you're going to find yourself able to intervene in ways that are intentional and from choice and that are graceful and elegant. And that is my wish for you. So let me ask you, are you now, after having gone through this 2-hour process with me, are you now able to leave this training knowing how to never experience stress again for the rest of your lives? Have I delivered on my promise? But if you're still a little bit questioning of that, then I'm going to ask you to answer this question up there on the screen. Who is squeezing the muscles in your body? It's not your spouse. It's not your clients. It's not your boss. It's not your children. You are the one who is squeezing those muscles. Are you enjoying that squeezing? If you are, continue to squeeze away. But when you've had enough and you are not wanting to suffer and struggle anymore, then I would invite you to stop. Now that's so simple, it's almost snark. But that's not its intention. It is to belie the fact that this is really simple stuff. That if you are distressed, it's not because of the external, it's because of what's going on inside of you. It is because of the muscles in your body being constricted. And at the moment that you start to take your attention off of what is outside of your control and put your attention back on what is inside of your control, and you engage that agency of releasing the muscles in your body, you are restored to a comfortable body, and you will soon find that your neocortex has activated and you're back to all your motor and cognitive skills. Simple. Not easy. It's a disciplined process. And you'll be, as I expect you'll have the same experience that I have, is that you will find yourself constantly failing along this. But the more you do it, the better your quality of life gets. Okay, we're going to go on from here and now stack all the skills up on top of this. But this is the foundation. The foundation is that you engage and stay in a regulated autonomic nervous system and begin practicing that. And now we're going to learn some skills to be able to bring to your clients.